Hello, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, 10 February 2026. This is Robert. Jared and I will be standing in for Mike today. Let's get started with Inside the Beltway. The House Rules Committee is scheduled to meet on the Save America Act today. This is a follow on to the SAVE Act, which this is a new bill introduced by Representative Chip Roy from Texas. They're expected to advance this bill for a floor vote tomorrow. And this new Save America Act, it would require many of the same things as the SAVE Act: proof of citizenship to register to vote, require mail-in ballot applicants to prove citizenship in person, and then mandate that states only register U.S. citizens. This is, I think, very likely to pass in the House, but the legislative filibuster remains an obstacle in the Senate. But House conservatives are trying to pressure Senate Majority Leader John Thune for some type of workaround. And I have seen now that there's talk among House conservatives to they're threatening to attach it to the FISA, or the Foreign Surveillance Act renewal bill later this year, as a way to get this bill passed. There are some House and Senate hearings today that we're going to keep an eye on and report anything that comes out of them that we find important. First is the House Ways and Means Committee. They're holding a hearing today on foreign influence in American nonprofits. This is going to include testimony from the Network Contagion Research Institute, and this is part of this hearing is going to focus on Neville Roy Singham. He's a Shanghai-based billionaire activist that has funded a lot of political activities here in the United States, including groups like the People's Forum, Code Pink, who I think he's actually married to one of the co-founders, the Answer Coalition, and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. There's also an oversight hearing in the Homeland Security Committee today on ICE, CBP, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. The House Foreign Affairs and Europe Subcommittee is going to hold a hearing titled Weaponized Mass Migration, a Security Risk to Europe and the United States at 2 p.m. Eastern. The House Administration Committee is scheduled to hold a hearing on restoring trust in federal elections today. And the Senate Judiciary Border and Immigration Subcommittee is scheduled to hold a hearing on Somali fraud in Minnesota. Moving over to the domestic sitrep, San Francisco, California public schools closed yesterday due to a teacher strike that was authorized by the United Educators of San Francisco Teachers Union. They're demanding, among other things, a 9% pay raise over the next 2 years. I think that 2-year time frame for this new contract is important because this actually puts this in the same time frame of this 2028 May Day general strike that people like UAW President Shawn Fain have been pushing for. And I've seen more of this general strike language coming out of the far left activists and even some progressive and centrist Democrats. Yesterday, and it was found in court documents that an 18-year-old man from St. Helens, Oregon, planned to follow Portland ICE agents home and kill them. And Coleman was turned in by the parent of one of his roommates after this parent was shown some messages from Coleman about the plot. And the court records show that Coleman also discussed murdering the parent of a friend of his and his roommates who worked as a security guard at the Portland ICE facility. To me, there appears to be a trend of more of these self-radicalized individuals who are planning attacks on federal agents and conservatives. And this is, I think, a lot of these people, these self-radicalized individuals, getting wound up by this increasingly violent anti-ICE and anti-Trump administration rhetoric online. Apparently, this 18-year-old Coleman, his last name is Coleman, was very active on Discord, which looks like it is a nexus for a lot of the self-radicalization. One of the things that apparently Discord is supposed to be doing in the next month is implementing some biometric requirements for accounts, which I think would likely have the effect of pushing a lot of these people off to other platforms. I'm not sure if that's going to mitigate what looks to be a lot of this violent rhetoric increasing, because there are a lot of activists who have been making threats openly on social media, as we covered last week with the arrest of the Antifa general who posted violent threats to ICE on TikTok. Over in California, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed a federal district court order blocking the Trump administration from ending temporary protected status for about 90,000 migrants. The lawsuit that blocked or attempted to block the Trump administration from doing this was brought by a group called the National TPS Alliance. And the Ninth Circuit said that one thing that they said I think is important here is that they said that the determination of TPS status, which I think implies other TPS status programs, not just for these 90,000 immigrants, may not be eligible for review by the federal courts. And I think it's important because there has been a fight between the Trump administration and especially the district courts over effectively what is justicable. Basically, what authority do the courts have over certain executive branch actions? And the Trump administration has been trying to assert their Article 2 powers over a lot of the executive branch. And I think this is probably one of the first cracks in that fight, that one of the first moves or major developments that breaks in the Trump administration's favor. And we might see more of these appeals courts and potentially going up to Supreme Court, some more decisions that fall in the Trump administration's favor on exerting executive power. Also in the federal courts in California, the federal district judge blocked California's No Secret Police Act. This is the bill that California passed that would ban agents from wearing masks during enforcement operations. Though I think this block is only temporary, because the judge also said that while this law discriminates against federal agents, it does not impede federal operations if it applied to all law enforcement statewide. From what I can see, State Senator Scott Wiener, who is the state senator who introduced that bill initially, he's already preparing a revised bill. So I think his fight is likely to continue. And there are other states that are proposing similar laws, and I think they're looking at this court fight to find the flaws in their own anti-mask bills and anti-mask regulations, because they're like other issues. The Blue State Coalition is coordinating this effort to disrupt the Trump administration. And once this court fight is done, if the revised bill passes and is okayed by the courts, I think we're likely to see more of these anti-mask laws come up in blue states. All right, Jared, if you could take us through the global sitrep, please.
Yep, we're going to start off in Cuba. Cuba announced that it will be unable to fuel aircraft at its 9 international airports due to the U.S.'s oil siege, their words. Now, international airlines have announced a few different ways that they're going to handle this. Some of them are going to carry extra fuel. Some of them are going to make additional stops. And some, like Air Canada, are just going to cease traveling to Cuba altogether. And this is the secondary tariffs that the U.S. said they were going to lay on Cuba. So basically a diplomatic blockade, actually taking effect very quickly here. Staying down in Latin America, Venezuela's National Assembly began its public consultation phase on the project of amnesty and democratic law. Now, this is a reconciliation bill, which is pretty common to see when you're transitioning from a dictatorship to a democracy, or at least a less dictatorial regime. President Rodriguez, the Venezuelan president, said that this is for unity and reconciliation, and the National Assembly down there stressed that this is going to focus on events and institutions, but not individuals. So this is going to be much more managed and try to keep it from devolving into just a witch hunt that is very, very common with these transitions. And lastly, the chief of naval operations for the United States Navy said that the Navy is going to have a global maritime response plan that is going to be tailored for regional responses, primarily with destroyers and drones. He's talking about getting rid of the carrier strike group as the go-to rapid response and have it be focused much more on a quicker, easier to hide, much quicker action ship. That'll primarily be drones and destroyers. Now, Cottle has actually previously tested this plan using destroyers to track Russian submarines in the Atlantic on short notice. This is actually a very important development because the quicker response also allows for quicker escalation. This would get Navy ships in the fight much sooner than if you had to mobilize an entire carrier strike group. And they are obviously looking directly at Taiwan with this, preparing for, in the event of an amphibious invasion or blockade from China, get in there, react, break the blockade immediately, regardless of if there's a carrier to back you up. That is likely to result in the destruction or damage of a destroyer in that case.
Thank you for that, Jared. Let's move on to our Homeland Operations sitrep. So CBS says they acquired some internal DHS documents, and according to these documents, less than 14% of the 392,619 illegal aliens arrested by ICE in 2025 had violent criminal convictions or charges, and only 60% had any criminal record. Of course, this data does not include arrests made by CBP, but I think this is important because this is an indicator, among others, that the Trump administration is actually not targeting only the worst of the worst, despite public signaling. I think this is an indicator the Trump administration has also significantly boosted administrative arrests. Administrative arrests are what are these target enforcement operations and collateral arrests and deportations of aliens whose only violation is immigration status. This is where they use those administrative warrants and the orders for final removal. And I think it's also important to point out that this statistic of I think it was like 2% of aliens arrested had some type of murder charge or conviction. A lot of this really does make sense for deportation efforts on a normal distribution, statistically, but I think is an indicator that the Trump administration is publicly signaling for public consumption the worst of the worst rhetoric, which they have been doing since effectively day one, while actually conducting a lot of these administrative arrests and collateral arrests. Over in Maine, Democratic Socialists of America organizer Todd Creechan said that effectively Senator Susan Collins' statement that ICE operations, including Operation Catch of the Day, have been on pause in Maine are not true. There have also been some other local organizers, including the Maine State Nurses Association union organizer, saying that ICE is still operating in Maine. But she said they're just blending in better. I think this is again another indicator that the Trump administration is messaging for public consumption while these deportation operations continue. Because this also fits what I've seen from activists on the ground in Minneapolis, that there's been a lot of talk about Trump retreating or softening tactics, but as far as I can tell, based on activist reports, they have not. Especially in Minneapolis, there have been a lot of arrests of these quote legal monitors and a lot of the anti-ICE rapid response group members. And then on the ground in Minneapolis, there was this far left collective crime think. They conduct regular interviews with a lot of these activists because they're trying to catalog and spread a lot of the tactics these groups are using. And according to some of these interviews they did with NIS activists over the last week, they're adopting a new tactic they call a filtering blockade. This is what you've seen photos or videos online over the last week of these blockades and intersections, and what they're using them for is to monitor ICE and CBP agents and disrupt their operations. And they're turning these street intersections into roundabouts with the idea of they're slowing but not fully stopping normal traffic. And what they're doing at these blockades is they're assigning different roles. So they have one member of the blockade who scans vehicles when they're looking for ICE and CBP activity, one or two members directing traffic. They also have a member of the blockade who coordinates communications with the rapid response groups throughout the city, and then what they call reinforcements, which are other activists standing by in order to if they decide to blockade ICE and CBP vehicles. I have seen since Border Czar Tom Homan took command of Operation Metro Surge, more local police response, and they have taken down some of these blockades, but the activists have immediately reestablished them. One of the bigger ones in Minneapolis has actually been taken down 3 times so far and reestablished. They're also distributing a guide on establishing these blockades, and the intent here is that more groups will use this tactic to impede ICE operations, because there's basically a call to action from some of these far left groups for people to spread this blockade tactic into other cities. They say this because they in order for this filtering blockade tactic to be effective, they need to be widespread. And the idea is to control the movement of ICE and CBP around cities, and also provide an on-the-ground surveillance capability. And I think we're likely to see this filtering blockade tactic filter out to other anti-ICE rapid response groups nationally, because this is what they have been doing. When we look at these federal surges earlier in the administration, like last year in Operation Midway Blitz, these groups, the earlier groups effectively figured out what tactics work and what don't, and what kind of response they'll get, how effective they can be at disrupting ICE and CBP operations, and then send those tactics out. One of the big ways they've done it is there's, Chicago-based activists have been hosting training events for anti-ICE activists from other states to come and do in-person training. They've also been sending people out to conduct training activity in some other states. They've also created guides, things like these de-arrest guides, and in this case, the filtering blockade guide, so that people who can't attend the in-person trainings are able to get a step-by-step process for implementing these tactics. So I expect to see this to start popping up when we get our next big federal surge. Right now, in Maine, ICE operations are still ongoing, but ICE is also adapting in some ways. So we saw this earlier in Operation Metro Surge, where ICE has been changing the time frames they conduct their immigration raids, and they've also been changing the way they conduct these raids by using smaller groups moving more quickly, so they can get onto a site, effect arrests, and then get it out of the area before rapid response groups can respond. So there's been this back and forth of changing tactics among ICE and the anti-ICE activists. If this filtering blockade tactic does prove effective, or at least from the perspective of the anti-ICE movement and organized resistance in Minneapolis, I would expect this to happen if we see a surge in Seattle or San Francisco or a ramp up in Portland, because those are. I think this is going to be much more effective in areas where there's a much larger organized far left presence and organized activist presence. All right, well, that's the end of our show for today. Let's move on to questions and answers. If you could pull up something for us, Jared, from JJRGJ. I have been told there are or were 80,000 Somalis in Minnesota. Why aren't they rising up and fighting ICE, since they don't seem to have much to lose? Well, I think from their perspective, they do have a lot to lose if they go out and directly. I mean, there have been some videos of supposedly Somali nationals, Somalis with American citizenship, ethnic Somalis who have been involved in some altercations with ICE agents, but not nearly on the scale as the anti-ICE organized resistance in Minneapolis. And I think from their perspective, they do have a lot to lose if they go out and get involved with some of these rapid response groups. Other than that, I think there's also just a disinterest in the activism side. I don't think they view that they really have anything to gain by getting involved. All right, next question, please. From Bad Wabbit, I thought FISA wouldn't renew until the end of the year, so they won't try and pass the SAVE Act until then. Isn't that like October, November? Actually, the FISA Section 702 renewals up in April. So that seems to be what they're pushing for, is when it comes up for renewal. This is only one of the ways that the House conservatives that want to get the SAVE Act passed, or the Save America Act passed, to put pressure on Thune. But yeah, it's up for renewal in April. So that seems to be when they're going to start pushing that, if they go that route. Next question, please, Jared. From Frozen Nomad, are any of you tracking the humanoid robotics advances being made in China? And if so, what do you see as the biggest concerns for Americans, whether economic competition, military implications, etc.? Well, Jared, what do you have to say about the humanoid robots in China? We have talked about this topic,
yeah,
actually.
I think a lot of the threats overblown. They tend to say that these are going to be used in the military, and they very well may be, but they also want to project them as being autonomous. And I have lost track of how many times they've been shown to not be autonomous, whether they're effectively just a motion capture device or even just remote controlled, the way that you would expect them to be remote controlled. A lot of these are, I think China's doing what China does, where they present something flashy and then they overblow the threat to their enemies. That said, yeah, I would be concerned about some of the lower scale robotics, like the pack dogs that you see. Those they're a force multiplier, but I don't think that you're going to see things like Terminators.
All right. Next question, please, Jared. From Diogratius, could these roadblocks and checkpoints be considered territorial control strategies like insurgents and militias do? Yeah, well, that's the political theory for these groups behind the use of blockades. That's what it is effectively is asserting control over territory because they can potentially blockade and disrupt federal operations, use it to conduct surveillance. But yeah, I would say it could be viewed as a territorial control strategy. Next question, please. From Cephalopod X, why haven't they cut off the funds and welfare for illegals yet, or prosecuted employers who hire illegals? Well, in the first one of the difficulties in cutting off, and there have been efforts by the Trump administration to do this, is that one of the big examples is Medicaid. So whenever Trump or a Trump official talks about illegal aliens getting access to Medicaid funds, which is true, they do, there's a lot of rhetorical pushback. Well, it's already illegal for them to get Medicaid. Well, how they do that is through state pass-throughs, things like Medi-Cal. So the states pretend like they don't realize money is fungible, and they will take a mix of state and federal funds into Medi-Cal. So they get Medicaid funds from the federal government, some state funding. They mix it all together, and then they give effectively Medicaid coverage to illegal aliens at the state level, and then say, well, this is state money. The difficulty in that is that they're using the state pass-throughs, and the Trump administration has been basically, a lot of this is being fought in the courts, and federal court cases take a long time. The good news is that the Trump administration does seem to be winning a lot more often when you get past the lowest level of district courts. When you get to the circuit court or the circuit court level, and especially the Supreme Court, they're winning much more often in these cases. As far as the employer side, that really requires action by Congress to amend the law, because the E-Verify system really has no teeth, unfortunately. So a lot of these employers, the illegal aliens they're employing have counterfeit documents. And as far as the employer is legally obligated to, they can say, well, this person presented documents that passed E-Verify. They're not obligated by the law to investigate beyond that once they put it into the system. And they do have some liability shield in the law. But the Trump administration has been going after some of these employers who is just not making the national level news. There's been a couple in Texas, for example, that have been investigated and some of them arrested, and the worksite raids have happened. It's just not blowing up into the national level. But yeah, a big part of it is going to require Congress to amend a lot of the laws controlling things like E-Verify and the employer side of this, in order to create incentives for employers to have, implement greater scrutiny over this. Because one of the big problems is also that, so they're using basically stolen identities, including like social security numbers. Well, when employers put this information to E-Verify, there's really no mechanism, for example, for the IRS to be notified, or to be notified that basically someone is using the same identity in multiple states at one time for employment purposes. So it's the enforcement side. The Trump administration is doing it, but giving some type of incentive to employers to implement greater scrutiny and actually give some teeth to law is up to Congress. Next question, please.
I believe are all caught up. Yep.
Well, I do see a comment from New Life F1S. Local police should stop them from doing that and arrest people doing it. Well, the local police are breaking up these blockades. I assume this is talking about the filtering blockade. They are doing this. The local police, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department, they are going in and taking these blockades down. And they have been doing this, but the blockades go back up immediately. That's kind of one of the disadvantages that the security forces in this situation have is that a lot of these rapid response groups they are dedicated to putting up these blockades, implementing this tactic. So as soon as this comes down, then they obviously know when they're coming because they have this rapid response surveillance network, and so they leave, the blockade's taken down, and they come back and put it back up. But that's the downside to counterinsurgency or security operations, is that you're a lot of the times you're being responsive rather than proactive. Oh, from Carl M. Robert, you have extensive knowledge of law. Are you a lawyer? Don't worry if you are. We still like you. No, I'm not a lawyer. I did some pre-law stuff in college and decided that wasn't the path I wanted to take. Do we have any more questions come in, Jared?
Nope.
All right.
No more coming in.
Well, if that's the end of our questions, we'll be back with you tomorrow in your inbox and on the show at 08 Central. Have a good rest of your day and stay out front.